Growing up, I never imagined my life would turn out the way it has. As a young man, I was optimistic about the future, and when I met Jenna, I believed I'd found my lifelong partner. We built our relationship on shared dreams and experiences, eventually getting married with plans to start a family. But over time, the promises we made to each other started to fade, slowly revealing cracks beneath the surface. Looking back, it's hard to say when things really began to shift. Maybe it was after Carrie was born, our daughter, or so I thought. The innocence of our early days together gave way to growing distance and unspoken frustrations. I spent years trying to fix what seemed broken, hoping we could find our way back to the love we once had. But now, I realized those efforts were futile, built on illusions I hadn't even noticed. "I'm leaving," I said sharply, my patience worn thin. "Good. Don't bother coming back," my wife shot back, her words dripping with venom. Normally, I'd throw a quick insult over my shoulder as I left, something like, "Go to hell," but this time I couldn't bring myself to stoop that low. After 14 years of marriage filled with similar blowouts, something about this moment felt different. I always came back, no matter how nasty the argument had been. But not this time. This time was final. In a few days, she'd understand the full weight of my departure. Over the past several months, Jenna's words had grown crueler, sharper with each passing day. At first, I couldn't make sense of it, her growing hostility like an unwelcome storm. I found myself withdrawing, spending more and more time outside the house, avoiding her biting remarks. By the time I'd finally dragged myself home, sometimes after they'd already eaten, the leftovers were already in the trash. I had become invisible in my own home. My name is Kurt Kaminsky. Technically, it's David Kurt Kaminsky, but my father's name is David too, so they called me Kurt from the start to avoid confusion. No, I'm not a junior. My father's name is David John Kaminsky. Why he didn't make me a junior, I don't know. I wouldn't have minded being called Junior or even DJ, but instead it's Kurt or nothing. Yes, I'm Polish. Well, technically, I'm an American of Polish descent. Yes, I've heard all the jokes. Maybe not all of them, since they seem to come up with new ones every year. Being the only person of Polish descent I know, other than my father, in this small town of about 10,000 people, I've been the target of many jokes. Technically, I'm only half Polish. My mom's side is German, French, Irish, and English. But since my last name is Kaminsky, I'm a Pole. My wife, soon to be my ex-wife, wasn't who I thought she was. I found out just 4 weeks ago. As I mentioned, I'd been spending more and more time away from her because of her abusive behavior. After coming home without dinner several times, one Monday evening I decided to eat out. I was sitting in a booth, ready to order, when I overheard two guys talking in the booth next to mine. My ears perked up when I overheard someone mention the word Pole. I focused in on the conversation and heard one man ask, "So, how long have you been seeing Pola's wife?" The other man replied, "Since they got married." "In fact, I slept with her on their wedding day, and he didn't know a thing," the first man continued. I didn't recognize the first man's voice, but the second man? That voice belonged to my best friend, George Carey. I was stunned. They kept talking, but I couldn't process anything else until George said, "Yeah, we meet up at least twice a month. Kurt's so obsessed with his cars he doesn't even notice. Idiot." Just then, the waitress came to take my order. I quietly said, "Sorry, I have to go." I left, walking away from their booth so they wouldn't see me. I couldn't believe it. My wife, Jenna, with my best friend. He was even the best man at our wedding. He's also my mechanic and will be for a while. Well, technically he's not my mechanic. He's an independent contractor I use exclusively to repair all my cars. In case you haven't guessed, I own a used car dealership. Yes, I'm a used car salesman, I thought to myself. I've heard all the jokes and insults, but my business does well. People know they'll get a reliable car at a good price. And they know I stand behind my cars. If problems come up, I handle them. George had always been a solid mechanic, and I kept him busy and paid him well. I once asked him to work for me full-time, but he said, I wouldn't respect myself if I had a Pole as a boss. He said it like a joke, but I knew he was serious. Despite that, I hired him as my independent contractor. Though he wasn't very independent, my business was his only source of income. This fact will be his downfall. I left the restaurant and drove around, asking myself, could this be real, or was he just joking? I could have hired a private investigator, but if what George said was true, they only met twice a month. This could be a waste of money, I thought. But I could check Jenna's phone and email, and that's exactly what I decided to do. When I got home, Jenna was as irritable as ever, which was fine by me. I didn't want to talk to her until I had the truth. Once she fell asleep on her side of the bed, I got up and checked her email. Nothing suspicious turned up. Her phone was password protected, but it didn't take long for me to figure out that our daughter's birth date was the code. I scrolled through a few messages, some of which could be misinterpreted, but none were from George. His name was in her contacts, but that wasn't strange. He was my best friend, after all. Maybe he was just talking out of his I thought. Still, her recent behavior made me feel like something was definitely up. Maybe not with George, but maybe with someone else, I pondered. I went to bed, tossing and turning, trying to sleep. It must have been after 2:43 a.m. because that was the last time I saw on the clock before I finally drifted off. The next day at the dealership, George came by as usual and joked, "Hey, Kurt, what do you even know about Poland? I bet if I laid out a map, you couldn't even point to it." I laughed and added, "You joke that all Poles are dumb, but I bet they could find the U.S. and maybe even our state on a map. Why don't you get to work?" George looked surprised and didn't know what to say. He knew I was right. He couldn't point out Poland if his life depended on it. George was never the book-smart type. He was good-looking, had street smarts, and knew engines, but college wasn't in the cards for him. I figured that's why he hung out with me in high school. I helped him with homework so he could graduate. Now, I was starting to rethink my choice of friends. "He made me rethink my choice of wife, too," I muttered as I headed into my office. I closed the door and started thinking about how to get proof of what might be going on. I can't just confront them, I thought. They'd only deny it. I needed evidence. I called a private investigator in Santa Fe and laid out my suspicions. "Well," the PI said, "since they only meet twice a month, it would be too expensive to keep surveillance constantly. You could put a tracker on your wife's phone. That way, you'll know where it is whenever you check. You could also install cameras at home, but unless they're top of the line, and by that I mean expensive, they'll probably get noticed. Even with good cameras, if your wife's sharp, she might sense something's off." "If I were you," the PI advised, "I'd start with a tracker and hope to catch them at a motel or somewhere like that." "Thanks for the advice," I said. "Send me info on a tracking app and I'll send you a check for your time." "You don't owe me anything," he replied. "You could find this stuff online." "Well, I appreciate the help," I said. "Expect a check soon. If you're ever in Silver City, stop by Kaminsky's parking lot and say hi." "I don't usually head that way, but if I do, I'll look you up," he said. I knew he was serious. One reason I was good at selling cars was that I made people feel valued. I learned early on that people need to feel like who they are and what they do matters. That's how you build trust in relationships. Later that night, after everyone was asleep, I downloaded the tracking app onto Jenna's phone and synced it with mine. It ran in the background, undetectable. That night, I slept better than I had in days. The next day at work, I checked the app now and then. Jenna worked part-time at the university bookstore, usually around 15 to 20 hours a week. She called the money she earned mad money and mostly spent it at the salon. Later, I checked the tracker again. She was at the grocery store. Then, she was home. George had been working all day, so nothing suspicious happened, at least for that day. That evening, I decided to be more pleasant to Jenna and our daughter. "Hey, you two want to go out to eat at Reveal?" I asked, trying to sound casual. Jenna seemed to react better than usual. Carrie, our 13-year-old daughter, wasn't too thrilled about hanging out with her parents. "I don't know, Dad," she mumbled. "Come on, Carrie. It'll be fun," I urged. Reluctantly, she got in the car and we headed to the restaurant. Dinner was nice enough, but I couldn't resist bringing George into the conversation. "So, I saw George at the shop today," I said, watching Jenna closely. She immediately looked away, then quickly changed the subject when she noticed me staring. My suspicions grew. Could what George said actually be true? I wondered, my mind racing. I needed to find out, one way or another. That night, I didn't check her phone again. I hadn't found anything suspicious in her calls or messages so far, so she was either deleting them right away or wasn't sending any at all. As I lay in bed, I turned to Jenna and said, "Thanks for coming to dinner. I really appreciated it." "Thanks, Kurt," she replied. "It was a nice surprise." Her tone softened as she added, "Maybe you'll get lucky tonight." It had been a while since she'd shown any interest in me. For the past few months, things hadn't been great between us. Jenna finished her nightly routine in the bathroom and came to bed, cuddling up next to me. I felt conflicted about the idea of having sex with her. If she's been cheating, do I really want this? I wondered. But until I had proof, I decided I wouldn't push her away. I wouldn't initiate anything, though. I'd let her take the lead. In the end, we did have sex, but it was nothing out of the ordinary, just vanilla, no need to elaborate. Afterward, I lay there, thinking. Throughout the week, I kept an eye on her phone, but nothing unusual appeared. By Saturday night, Jenna was asleep when I checked her phone again. No new messages from George or anyone else suspicious. I was close to convincing myself that George had been making things up to impress someone. He'd done that before, even back in school. I went back to bed, but something still didn't sit right with me. My subconscious wouldn't let me relax. At 2 a.m., wide awake and staring at the ceiling, I finally got up, went downstairs, and poured myself a Jack and Coke, hoping it would help me unwind. Sitting there with the drink in one hand and her phone in the other, I tried to piece everything together. Then, like a lightning bolt, it hit me. The password to Jenna's phone was our daughter's birth date. Carrie was born exactly 9 months after our wedding. A perfect wedding night baby. Or so I thought. What if George really had been with Jenna on our wedding day? I thought, my mind racing. There's a 50% chance Carrie isn't mine. My heart pounded as I went to the bathroom, grabbed a cotton swab, and quietly entered Carrie's room. She was fast asleep, snoring softly. I carefully swabbed the inside of her cheek and placed the sample in a plastic bag. Then I swabbed myself for comparison. If Carrie is my biological daughter, at least that'll put one doubt to rest, I thought. But if she's not, well, I'll cross that bridge when I get there. Sunday was for housework, and we each had our own tasks. I made sure to take my time, limiting my interaction with both Jenna and Carrie. I was struggling to keep my emotions in check, not wanting to give anything away before I had the results. The thought of what I'd done the night before, taking those DNA samples, haunted me all day. At one point, Jenna noticed and asked, "Kurt, is something bothering you?" I quickly came up with an excuse. "I'm thinking about buying a bunch of cars at the next auction. It'll tighten our finances for a bit until I sell some of them." "Well, don't overdo it," she replied with mild concern. She always said "we" when talking about the business, which was ironic because I had registered the company in my name alone. I didn't want our personal issues affecting the business or exposing us to unnecessary risks. "I'm thinking about paying off the credit cards and canceling all but one," I added, part of a plan to protect my finances. "It'll improve our credit." "Whatever you think is best," Jenna replied, not suspecting a thing. That idea, paying off the credit cards and reducing any financial ties with Jenna, came to me in a flash. It was a step to protect myself if my suspicions turned out to be true. Early Monday morning, I took the DNA samples to the university and found someone in the science department. They referred me to the department head, who assured me they had the resources to run the test. "We've got a strong program in cellular and molecular biology," he explained. "We'd be happy to help." I handed over the samples and a few business cards. "Anyone who works on this gets 10% off their next car purchase," I added, always thinking of the business. The department head smiled. "I've been thinking about upgrading my Camry. Maybe I'll check out your lot." "Whenever you're ready," I said, forcing a smile. I left the university weighed down by the possibilities of what the DNA results could reveal. This could be the end of my marriage, I thought. When I got home, I kept a neutral face and told Jenna, "I'm thinking about buying new cars to fill the lot." It wasn't a bad idea, even if it was just a cover for my stress. Later that day at work, I called Paul, my accountant, into my office. We discussed paying off the mortgage and buying more cars, going over the finances in detail. But my mind kept drifting to the DNA test. What if Carrie wasn't my daughter? The next 2 days dragged on like an eternity. I was barely functioning, on edge the entire time. Finally, on Wednesday evening, the call came from the department head. "I have the results," he said. "I'll meet you at my office," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. When he arrived, I could tell from his expression that the news wasn't good. He handed me the results in a manila envelope and said, "The two samples aren't related." I nodded, even though deep down I already knew what the result would be. It still hit me like a punch to the gut. The department head gave me a moment to collect myself before asking, "So, what car are you thinking of upgrading to?" "I need to get a sports car for a client," I said, trying to stay businesslike. "Maybe a Mazda Miata. I'll see what's at the auction tomorrow." He thanked me, and as he left, I knew I had to get out of the office too. "I'm heading out early," I told my assistant. "If you need me, I'll be just a call away." I got in my car and drove around the city, my mind racing. Everything seemed different now. My marriage, my family, my entire life. I need to call my lawyer, I thought. George had to pay for this, and so did Jenna. They had both betrayed me in the worst possible way. Before doing anything drastic, I pulled into a restaurant to think. As I ate a small meal, I wondered, have I really wasted the last 15 years? I don't even have a biological child from this marriage. What should I do next? I knew I couldn't pretend I didn't know. Of course, I had suspicions before, but now that I had confirmation, there was no turning back. One thing was certain. George would pay. I didn't care that he had been my best friend for years. With friends like him, I didn't need enemies. Jenna would pay too. I wondered if she even knew Carrie wasn't mine. Even if she didn't, she had hidden the fact that she'd slept with my best man on our wedding day. My best friend. I had no reason to doubt what I'd overheard. She had been seeing him at least twice a month. My anger flared, and I knew I needed to be alone before I lost control. I knew I should have called Jenna to let her know I wouldn't be home that evening. There was no way I could go back. I was too angry, and I might do something that would get me arrested. So I dialed her number. "Hello, Kurt," she answered. "Hey, I'm staying in Albuquerque tonight so I can be ready for the auction at 8 in the morning," I said, trying to sound calm. "Oh, fine. Bon voyage," she replied curtly. It wasn't normal for me to go to Albuquerque for auctions, so this was unusual. I wondered if she'd take advantage of the fact I'd be gone all night. She'd have to explain Carrie's absence to my parents, which wouldn't be easy. I planned to check her phone tracker throughout the night to see if she decided to go anywhere. I followed the road to Albuquerque, focused on buying at least 20 cars, including a Mazda Miata. I'd arranged for them to be sent to my lot after the auction, but the question in my head was who I could trust for mechanical inspections. George wouldn't get any more work from me once his current repairs were done. When he hears I bought 24 cars, I thought, he'll see dollar signs thinking about how much he can charge me. But that wouldn't happen, and I'd keep it quiet until the last moment. I planned to ask a local auction dealer to recommend someone reliable to inspect the cars before shipping them to my small town. I arrived in Albuquerque around 9 a.m. and checked into a Best Western. Even as the owner, I couldn't justify using company funds for an expensive hotel. The room was comfortable and the bed was decent. That's all I needed. I'm a simple person with simple needs. Once in the room, I immediately checked Jenna's phone tracker. She was still at home, or at least her phone was. Sleep didn't come easy that night. I kept thinking about why she did what she did. How could she justify sleeping with him on our wedding day, let alone seeing him twice a month for years? I began to question our entire marriage. It was never perfect, but I thought we loved each other. Now I realized the mistake started from the beginning. In the early years after the wedding, things were tough. We didn't expect to have a baby right away. We originally planned to wait 3 or 4 years before starting a family. We'd agreed on 3 kids before the wedding, but Carrie's arrival changed everything. Finding out my best friend had ruined those plans made the struggles of the last 14 years seem meaningless. There had been good times, but even those were now overshadowed by this revelation. If Jenna hadn't slept with George, maybe she would have had a child with me. Maybe she wouldn't have had such a hard pregnancy and a difficult child that made her not want any more. George destroyed my life when he seduced my wife on our wedding day. Now he enjoys her company twice a month, probably laughing at me all the while. He must pay. I thought about this as I lay down trying to sleep. Anger rose again. I needed to calm down or I wouldn't get any rest. I turned on the TV to a mindless comedy. The laughter helped me relax, and by 11 I was ready to fall asleep. The auction went well. I got great cars at great prices and met some dealers from the Albuquerque area. There were no Miatas at the auction, so I asked around. 2 dealers had 1 each, 1 red and 1 black. I told them I'd make a deal once I knew which color my client wanted. "Of course," they both said. "Just let us know what cars you have and we'll figure something out." I realized I should attend this auction more often. Talking to other businessmen inspired me to expand my business. Plus, it kept my mind off my problems. Later that afternoon, I met with a lawyer. The news wasn't good. I would lose half my property and have to pay alimony and child support for a child that wasn't even mine. I decided then that I wouldn't get a divorce. Instead, I would leave her with George's baby. I'd pay off the mortgage on the house and she could stay there. But since the mortgage was in my name only, she wouldn't be able to sell it. If I moved out but kept paying the taxes and utilities, she couldn't claim abandonment and take everything. I had to figure out what to do about my business. It was set up as a corporation, but if I didn't protect it, I might lose everything. I needed to speak with my business lawyer. When I got home that evening, I was exhausted from the long day. I'm tired, I told Jenna. I'm going to take a shower and head straight to bed, and I made my way to the bedroom. Do you want dinner? She called after me. No, I had a late lunch, I replied. At least she thought to ask. The shower felt amazing, like my problems were washing away. While I still had issues to deal with, I was on my way to solving them. I fell asleep almost as soon as my head hit the pillow. The past week had been stressful, but now that I had a plan in place, my mind could finally rest. I woke up early, feeling refreshed, and headed to the office before Jenna and Carrie even got up. I had a lot to do and more plans to set in motion. When my staff started arriving, they found me deep into spreadsheets, financial reports, and sales forecasts. I told Paul I had purchased 23 cars and that we'd close the deal with the dealership in Albuquerque within a week. I also told Anna not to assign any more work to George, but to keep it quiet. She gave me a puzzled look. You're the boss, she said. Thanks, Anna. You're irreplaceable, I replied. At 9 a.m., I called my business lawyer to ask for advice about the company. Well, your business is registered, but she could still force you to sell it for half its value, he explained. Have you thought about selling it ahead of time? No, I haven't. Should I? I asked, unsure. That would keep it out of her reach, he said. This business is my life. I can't just get rid of it, I told him firmly. All right, let me think it over and review the situation. I'll get back to you by the end of the week, he assured me. This news was a blow. I'd worked so hard to build the business into what it was. It felt like my child. Unlike Carrie, I thought bitterly. Anger rose up again, but I had to stay focused. Being a good business person meant putting personal problems aside and dealing with business. First on my list was calling Doug, the department chair who had shown interest in the Miatas. Doug, it's Kurt Kaminsky. I've got info on 2 Miatas, one red, one black. Still interested? Yes, if the price is right, he replied. Which color are you leaning toward? Doug's contact asked. I can bring one by for you to check out and we can discuss the numbers. Even if we don't settle on a price, I can sell it easily. Which one do you suggest? Doug replied. Well, each has its pros and cons. The red is bold, but it fades faster. The black looks sleek, but it heats up quickly in our climate. Will you be keeping it in a garage? The contact asked. Yes, I can do that, Doug confirmed. Then red's a good choice since it won't be in the sun much. I'd go with that unless you prefer black for its look. Red sounds good. When can I see it? How about Monday or Tuesday? His contact suggested. Either works. Just call me when it's ready, Doug confirmed. Will do. I hung up and called the dealer with the red Miata to arrange a trade. He was interested in a BMW I had on the lot, one that had been sitting for 3 months. It would sell faster in a bigger city. By the time George arrived at the office, there were still several cars needing repair. As an independent contractor, he could come and go as he pleased, as long as the job got done. That suited me for now. He overheard the salesman talking about the 23 cars coming to the lot and poked his head into my office. Hey, Kurt, when are those cars coming from the auction? I want to schedule the work for you. The auction house is handling delivery. They'll be here sometime late next week or the week after, I said, struggling to remain calm. Okay, I'll have Anna put me on the schedule, he replied. I chuckled to myself after he left. He had no idea what was coming. That weekend, I kept my distance from Jenna. I busied myself with yard work and running errands. I didn't even bother checking her phone tracker anymore. It didn't matter to me now. I felt nothing but contempt for her. The fact that I had been raising another man's child was unforgivable. On Monday, I returned to the car lot. I called the dealer in Albuquerque to arrange dropping off the Beamer and picking up the Miata. Great, he said. Let's grab lunch when you arrive. It was a perfect day for a drive, so I told Anna I'd be out all day. Hold down the fort, I said. Okay, boss, she replied with her usual enthusiasm. She really was irreplaceable. I made a mental note to give her a raise. The trip was enjoyable, as was lunch. The other dealer made me feel welcome, and I felt like I'd made a new friend. Driving back in the Miata, I had a great time. The top was down, the wind ruffling my hair, and I decided I'd call another dealer and get the black Miata too. I needed to enjoy life more, and I wasn't going to need more than a 2-seater anytime soon. When I pulled into the driveway in the red sports car, Jenna glanced out the window and must have said something to Carrie because they both came outside to watch. Honey, why do you need this car? You know we need something with a back seat for Carrie, she said in a condescending tone. I just picked it up from Albuquerque for a client. Thought you might want to go for a ride, I replied. No, honey, I don't like small cars, Jenna said with a hint of contempt. Carrie, I called, gesturing for her to come and sit down. No, Dad, they already tease me enough about my last name. I don't want to be seen riding around with a Polish used car salesman. She said it with that teenage flair for disrespect. I was stunned. Where had this attitude come from? When I looked at Jenna, she acted like Carrie had done nothing wrong. Great. Now both women in my house disrespected me. Well, I'm going for another drive. I'll be back when I'm back, I said, putting the car in reverse and driving away. I drove around the outskirts of Silver City, fuming. My marriage was falling apart fast. When I finally returned around 9:30, I went straight upstairs, took a shower, and got into bed. When I didn't come down after my shower, Jenna came into the room. The hallway light shone directly into my eyes, and I squinted and shut them. What's wrong? Are your feelings hurt because we didn't like your sports car? Aren't you going to spend time with your family? You're not only Polish, you're acting like a child, she said, her voice dripping with scorn. Where was this attitude coming from? It had to be George. She'd spent time with him, and his low opinion of my heritage had clearly rubbed off on her. Now she was passing it on to Carrie, her daughter, not mine. I needed to remember that. I may have to support her, but she wasn't my child. It seems like you and your daughter don't want to pull around, so you can both just screw off, I snapped, furious. Her attitude was making everything worse. She would regret treating me this way. From that moment on, the Kaminsky house became a cold and quiet place. The next day, Doug came by to check out the Miata, and he was thrilled. We went over the numbers, and he was surprised by the great price he got, $3,000 under Kelly Blue Book. As he finished up the paperwork, he said, "My best friend handles car purchases for the university. We replace about 16 cars every 2 years. It's not a huge order, but could you talk to him?" "I'd love to. You know, I'm always ready to make a deal," I said. "I'll ask Jim to call you by the end of the week," Doug replied. "That'd be great. Thanks," I said. That's how I'd built my business, by treating people right and showing them I valued their referrals. On Wednesday, my lawyer called. "Hey, Kurt, I think I found a solution to your potential problem. Can you come by this afternoon to discuss it?" "Absolutely. I'm eager to get things started. The atmosphere at home is getting unbearable." At the meeting, I listened to the plan and liked what I heard. It would take about 2 weeks to put into action, but it would be worth it if everything worked out. During those 2 weeks, I slowly moved my personal belongings and tools from the house to an apartment in a nearby city. Meanwhile, George was still anxiously waiting for the 24 cars to arrive, hoping for work he could bill me for. Every time he asked, I kept putting him off. That weekend, while Jenna and Carrie were out, I did some yard work and quietly cleaned out my closet and drawers. Since Jenna did laundry during the week, she wouldn't notice my clothes disappearing bit by bit. By Monday night, I was ready. I told her, "I'm leaving." She started up with the same disrespectful tone, mocking me for being Polish and a used car salesman. In the past, I would have gone to a motel for a night or two, depending on how angry I was. But on Tuesday morning, after the blow-up, I arrived at the car lot early. As my employees came in, I asked them to meet me in the conference room. They thought it was just our usual weekly meeting. "Good morning," I began. "As you know, the cars I bought a couple of weeks ago arrived yesterday. They've already been inspected and are ready for sale. From now on, we won't be using George for any more work. If he asks, just tell him we've decided to go in a different direction and leave it at that. You've all been incredible. You're like family to me, which makes what I'm about to say very difficult." I paused and wiped a tear from my eye. "I sold the business." Everyone looked shocked. I could see the surprise in their faces, but I continued. "Nothing will change for you. Anna, you'll take on some of my responsibilities, and of course, you'll get a raise to reflect that." Everyone, despite their surprise, began congratulating Anna. They respected her and knew she deserved the promotion. "Anna, after the meeting, come see me. We'll go over a few things. I'll still be around in an advisory role and might make the occasional sale, but I don't want to take away your sales." They were all relieved that I'd still be involved, at least part-time. As the meeting ended and we stepped out, George was waiting outside. "Hey, why wasn't I included in the meeting?" he asked, having attended most of the previous ones. "Because it was a staff meeting and you're not an employee," I replied bluntly. He stammered, then said, "I see the cars have arrived. I'll get started on them." "No, they've already been inspected and prepped for sale. There's nothing for you to do," I said firmly. He looked shocked. "But I always check your cars." "What's going on, Kurt?" "George, I sold the business and the new owner wants to go in a different direction," I told him, barely containing my anger. "I can't believe you sold it. What am I supposed to do now? Of course, it was all about him. Well, you can pick up your check for the work you did over the last 2 weeks. It wasn't much, as Anna had only used his services a few times. He had been waiting for those 23 cars to arrive, thinking he'd be busy. How wrong he was. I didn't feel sorry for him at all. In fact, I wished I could tell him to his face that he was a backstabbing traitor. Later, I met with Anna. Anna, can you keep this conversation confidential? I asked. Of course, Kurt. You know I won't say anything, she reassured me. Okay, here's the deal. I set up companies registered in Nevada. One owns the lot, and the other owns the business. I'm the sole shareholder of both. Eventually, I'll divorce Jenna, and I want to make sure she doesn't get the business. Why? Anna asked, looking confused. I've moved out of my house. Jenna doesn't know yet, but I'm not coming back. She had an affair with George. In fact, I'm pretty sure Carrie isn't my daughter. She's George's. I'm not even sure if Jenna or George knows. But they'll figure it out soon enough. I'm not filing for divorce yet, but I'll keep paying the utilities and taxes on the house so she can't claim abandonment and take everything. I've structured the company's sale so when the time comes, they'll be left to deal with it. By the time the divorce is finalized, the sale proceeds will be gone. I'll be making almost nothing from consulting or occasional sales. Anna, you'll handle the daily operations. I trust you completely. Anna smiled again when I explained the new structure. But when she heard about Jenna and George, her expression hardened. I truly respected her, and she always had my back. I continued, I have one more task for you. Order a new sign and letterhead. We're renaming the business. This will further convince George and Jenna that it's under new ownership. The new name is Helpless Car. She looked puzzled. Someday I'll explain why I picked that name. For now, just know it tells the whole story. Though confused, she trusted me and agreed to follow through. After saying a few words to the staff, I left the office and got into my Audi, driving toward Albuquerque. About 2 hours into the drive, my phone rang. The caller ID showed it was Jenna. I hadn't expected her to call so soon. This had happened before. I'd leave for a few days. She'd call, we'd talk, and I'd return. Things would change for a bit, but we'd always fall back into the same routine. I decided to answer, curious about what she'd say. Hello? I said using the speakerphone. Kurt, what's going on? She asked hesitantly. Nothing. I'm driving to Albuquerque, I replied. Why are you going there? To pick up a car, I said flatly. So, what I heard isn't true, she asked. It hit me. George must have called her. She was calling to get the full story. I don't know, I said. What did you hear? George called me. He said you sold the business. Why would he call you? I asked, catching her off guard. She fumbled with her words. He's your best friend. He wondered if I knew what was going on, she said. Best friend? That was a joke. To him, I was just the clueless Pole who didn't realize what was happening behind his back. Apparently, my family was embarrassed that I was a used car salesman, I said. So, yes, I sold the business. Now you won't have to bear that burden anymore. Shouldn't we have discussed this first? She asked, worry evident in her voice. I could see how she might be concerned about how it would impact her life. But this was my company. I built it before we were married, and I had the right to sell it whenever I wanted. I just hoped the new owner would treat my former employees well. So, did you get a good price for it? She asked, her concern shifting toward her standard of living. I didn't care about that. I just knew I needed a change. After a few weeks off, I'd start looking for a new job. What about the mortgage? She pressed. Oh, I used the money to pay off the house. You don't have to worry about that now, I replied. You'll just need to cover the utilities and taxes. What about food, gas, and insurance? She asked, almost hysterical. Oh, I guess I'm just a stupid Pole, I replied sarcastically. I didn't think about that. Maybe you could pick up more hours at work. When are you coming home? She asked, desperation creeping into her tone. I'm not, I said calmly. What? I told you I was leaving that night and you told me not to come back. So I won't be coming back. Don't worry. I'll find a way to cover the utilities so the power doesn't get shut off. You can't do this, Kurt. You have to come back. No, I really don't, I replied flatly. Kurt, don't do this, she pleaded. I already have. What about your daughter? She asked, trying to guilt me. You mean Carrie? The girl who's ashamed of her last name and the fact that her dad is a used car salesman? Kurt, she's just 13. You can't take that to heart. Well, it doesn't matter anymore. I won't be coming back, so neither of you will have to be embarrassed by me again. I hung up and turned off my phone, letting her stew. I knew she'd be angry when I didn't pick up her calls. After calming down, I enjoyed the drive to Albuquerque, assuming her next call would be to her lover to share what I'd said. When I arrived, I turned my phone back on. 5 messages, 3 from Jenna, 1 from George, and 1 from Anna. I called Anna right away. "Hey, Anna. Sorry, my phone was off. Avoiding some unwanted calls," I said. "Yeah, I get it. Your wife's been calling me too. And George rang, asking if I knew where you were. I told them you don't come around here anymore. Is everything okay?" she asked, sounding concerned. "Thanks for covering for me. If they keep bothering you, just tell them you'll report it as maltreatment," I suggested. "Kurt, you might feel like you're alone right now, but we're your family," she reminded me gently. "Thanks, Anna. You always know the right thing to say. Your husband's a lucky man." "Trust me, he knows," she replied with a laugh. After hanging up, I debated whether to call Jenna or George, but decided against it. Let them stew. I made my way to the parking lot office to meet the owner. I brought the Audi we discussed. "Want to talk about a trade?" I said as I handed over the keys. He inspected the car, clearly impressed. "I could sell this in a week, easy. You sure you want to trade? Feels like I'm getting the better end of the deal." "I'm not after the money, just want a sports car," I replied. Half an hour later, I was on the road in a convertible, heading north to Santa Fe. For the next 2 weeks, I traveled around northern New Mexico, Arizona, Utah, and Colorado. I kept in touch with Anna in case she needed me, but once I knew everything was settled, I headed west. Of course, they kept calling, first annoyed, then apologetic, and finally angry. I listened, but I didn't care. When they told me the credit card was canceled, I laughed. George even called, saying I was a terrible person for leaving Jenna. That made me laugh harder. I got a message from my lawyer saying Jenna had threatened legal action if I didn't reach out to her. I immediately called him back. "Did Jenna really threaten you?" I asked. "Yes, but don't worry. As long as you're still paying for the house, she doesn't have a case," he assured me. "I've got something better, a recording of her telling me not to come back," I said, feeling more confident. "Perfect. Send it over to me. If she pushes any further, I'll use it against her," he replied. I spent the next few months driving across the Southwest. Reno, Lake Tahoe, the coast, Yosemite, San Diego, Vegas, just enjoying the road. The Miata wasn't the most comfortable, but it was fun. People, even some women, noticed me, but I wasn't interested. I was still married, complicated as that was. After 3 months and 8,000 miles, I returned to Silver City. At the dealership, everyone welcomed me back. Anna greeted me with a huge smile and a hug. We talked, and I suggested taking the team out for food and drinks. She agreed to close the store early. Later, I met with my lawyer. Jenna had tried to claim abandonment while I was gone, but he'd blocked her. We discussed the next steps. At 5, I met the team at Wrangler's for dinner. After about an hour and a half, people started leaving until it was just Anna and me. She looked at me and said, "Kurt, you're not helpless. You just trusted the wrong people." I smiled. "So, you figured it out?" "Yes, it took time, but I realized what you meant. All those jokes about you are insulting. You're so much more than that." "Thank you, Anna. You're the reason I came back. You didn't fill my shoes. You made your own." "I had a great mentor," she replied. We hugged, and she left to meet her husband. I returned to my apartment, which hadn't been aired out in 3 months. After opening some windows, I grabbed a beer and sat on the terrace. I thought about Jenna and how our dreams had disappeared. Around 8:30, I decided it was time to go to my house. Technically, it was still mine since I bought it before we married. The yard was overgrown, and the house looked neglected. When I knocked, Carrie answered, shocked to see me. "Dad," she stuttered, "is your mom home?" She called for Jenna, who came from the kitchen and screamed, "What are you doing here?" "Just traveling," I said calmly. Then George came out of the bedroom, wearing just underwear. "Ah, the whole family's here," I remarked dryly. Jenna looked confused, while Carrie seemed uncomfortable. "George moved in because we needed help after you left," Carrie said bitterly. "Well, you're misinformed," I responded. "George was never my employee, so I didn't fire him, and the bills are all paid." "What about food and gas?" Jenna shouted. "We've been struggling, Kurt." "You had a job. Wasn't that enough for groceries?" "So, you think you'll just move back in?" Jenna demanded. "No, I'll give you and George until the end of next month to find somewhere else. Take Carrie with you." Jenna, furious, snapped, "She's our daughter." I laughed bitterly. "Actually, Carrie isn't mine. She's George's." The room fell silent. Carrie looked stunned, and Jenna went pale. George stood there, speechless. I tossed them the DNA report. "See for yourselves." They read it, then collapsed into chairs, overwhelmed. I turned to Carrie. "Tell them they'll get divorce papers and an eviction notice next week. I'm done." Without waiting for a response, I turned and walked away. The whole time I'd been gone, I wondered if this affair had been happening throughout my entire marriage. Had she ever been faithful? Probably not. We met when she came in to buy a car, and George was working on it. I thought it was fate, but now it seemed like she'd already chosen George, even before we were married. I went back to my apartment and drank a beer, trying to clear my mind. The next morning, I went straight to my lawyer and asked him to begin the divorce and house sale process. I knew we'd have to sell the house and split the proceeds, but being nearly unemployed meant I wouldn't have to pay alimony or child support, especially since George was already involved. The betrayal was overwhelming. It would take me a long time to trust anyone again, whether it be a man or a woman. Maybe I needed to see a therapist. But for now, I went back to work at the dealership, not as the boss, but as a salesman. I told the team I only needed one sale a week to cover rent and groceries. That was enough for me. As for the court-ordered child support, I insisted on paying the bare minimum. As the divorce unfolded, Jenna hired a lawyer. I didn't know how she afforded one. Maybe the lawyer was working pro bono, but they didn't dig deeply into my finances. My lawyer had made sure everything was well protected. I heard from the team that while I was gone, George had come by almost daily trying to get a job from Anna. She had no trouble turning him down each time. Eventually, he gave up, and I heard the only job he could find was at Valvoline, doing quick oil changes for $13 an hour. I contacted a realtor and informed Jenna that the house was going on the market. She had already been served the eviction notice, so she would need to move out before the house was sold. One evening, there was a knock on my apartment door. Naturally, it was Jenna. "What do you need, Jenna?" I asked coldly as I opened the door. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice softer than usual. "I don't think that's a good idea. We're in the middle of a lawsuit," I reminded her, keeping my distance. "Come on, Kurt, it's just me, no lawyers. Can't we sit and talk civilly?" she pleaded. I hesitated for a moment. "Fine, but let's go to Denny's. There'll be witnesses," I said, making it clear I didn't trust her completely. I didn't trust her enough to be alone with her. We sat down in a booth at Denny's, and after a few pleasantries, I asked, "Why, Jenna?" She looked at me, hesitated, and then said, "The simple answer is I liked both of you and couldn't decide." "So you were dating both of us at the same time?" I asked, trying to stay calm. She looked down at the table, ashamed. "Yes, but George told me not to tell you because he knew it would ruin your relationship. He thought it would affect work." "So, when I asked you to marry me, why did you say yes?" I pressed. "Because I loved you," she said, tears filling her eyes. "And George?" I asked, still pushing. "I loved him too, but I knew he'd never be a suitable husband. When you asked me to marry you," she continued shakily, "George and I agreed to end things. I wanted to focus on us and the wedding. So, on our wedding day while having sex with him, you said, 'I'm marrying Kurt, but you're still my man,'" I said, barely keeping my anger in check. Jenna broke down in tears. "Everything was wrong," she sobbed. "What was wrong, Jenna?" I asked, trying to keep my cool. "I didn't want to lose him, and he didn't want to lose me. I just didn't know how to let him go." "Well, congratulations. Now you two have each other. You even have your child together. By the way, great job with the name Kari," I added sarcastically. "I didn't even realize it until I had time to think." Through her tears, Jenna said, "Kurt, I didn't know. I didn't know Carrie wasn't yours." I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself. I had a lot of time to think on the road during those 3 months. I pieced things together. I paused, looking at her closely. "So, Jenna, why are you here? What do you really want?" She wiped her eyes and softened her voice. "I wanted to tell you that I still love you, Kurt." I sighed, leaning back. "It's nice to hear that, but I don't think you understand what love is. I loved you more than anything. I would have done anything for you, but you can't say the same, can you?" She shook her head, crying harder. "I did love you, Kurt. I did, but I made so many mistakes. I can't undo them." "I believe you loved me, Jenna, but not the way I loved you. And now I don't love you anymore. I did, but now I only feel contempt." Her expression told me she finally realized our relationship was over for good. There will never be in us again, Jenna, I said quietly but firmly. After a pause, I asked one last question. Have you and George ever really stopped seeing each other? I already knew the answer but needed to hear it from her. She hesitated, biting her lip, and decided to be honest. We never really stopped. We had our lulls, but we'd still meet, usually twice a month. It hurt to hear her admit it, but strangely, I felt a sense of relief. At least she was finally being honest. I pressed on. One more thing. What happened about a year ago? Your attitude toward me changed so much. You became so cruel, Jenna. The contempt was obvious. Her face turned red with guilt. After a moment, she replied, George started pushing me to try new things. He wanted a ménage à trois, but not with you. He kept insisting on it, and it made me resent you, even though you had no idea. I know it sounds crazy, but I started resenting you for not being the kind of person who would ever agree to something like that. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. So, did you go through with it? I asked, though I already knew the answer didn't really matter. No, she said, shaking her head. I thought about it, but I couldn't do it. And then you left, and everything just fell apart. Well, now you can do whatever you want, I said, standing up. I don't care anymore, Jenna. None of this matters to me now. I threw some money on the table to cover the bill. We're done here. We both knew it was over. As we walked to our cars, there was nothing left to say. 4 months later, we stood before a judge, and our divorce was finalized. George was there, waiting for Jenna. As I left the courthouse, he approached me. Kurt, he said awkwardly, maybe we can grab a drink. To settle things the old-fashioned way. I glanced at him, surprised by his audacity, but by then all the anger and animosity I'd felt toward him and Jenna had faded. They didn't matter to me anymore. I nodded. Sure, I said, why not? We had a drink, and as I sat there, I realized this would be the last time I'd ever have to deal with either of them. They could have each other. Let them live in the mess they'd created. As I left, I thought about how Jenna would now have to adjust to a lower standard of living. She and George wouldn't have it easy, but that wasn't my problem anymore. I was free. I might be a lot of things, Polish, a used car salesman, but one thing was certain. I had my dignity, and from now on, I was going to live life on my own terms.